Today we have to give our congratulations to Henry VIII, because 484 years ago, at the tender age of 49, he married his fifth wife, who was just 17 at the time. But still, we can hope for them to have a happy marriage in the future. However, that wasn't the case. She cheated on him a year later with her cousin and got her head cut off, much like the previous wives. So, that's that. Now, today we are going to check what happened a few days ago, which was the latest round of beta testing of raid bosses. This was important because right the day before, Blizzard had this type of balance tuning coming in. So it would have been a nice set of raid testing because we get to see the results of the two DK specs being nerfed. We could see the large buff given to Havoc Demon Hunter and the results buffs to Feral Druid. We could have seen the, as usual, multiple sets of changes to Mage, especially the buffs to Fire, but also the buffs to Frost Mage, and all of the other changes coming in from the tuning, right? Unfortunately, our dear friend Roby, who has kept track of the automated pulls from Warcraft logs and just gave us the average results, etc., is busy today and recently. It's out having fun in Korea, so we don't have all of these automated results to check. Which means someone else would have had to grab those logs, and the someone else for today was me. However, I was way more picky with picking up these results, because for example, when you go and look at some of these results, you will also go back way further down and start grabbing the DPS of some very underperforming players that might have died or might have gotten a stroke. For example, look at a bunch of Arcane mages getting into the averages with like sub-tank DPS, or like Affliction Warlocks, or then you have like Marksmanship Hunters doing 300 or 400,000 DPS when the average on this fight was well over 1 million, right? So instead, what I did going to look log by log was, making sure that all of the results that were being counted were results from, number one, long fights. So the pulls on these logs are either kills of the boss, so full logs, or logs where at least they last 5+ minutes, so that they are relevant. And then after you look at the logs, you need to make sure the DPS player or the healer was alive for most of the fight. So we cannot count on log number 4, this Devastation Evoker, having 138,000 DPS because he died 20% of the fight in. So that's the logic. Even on the skill of Sikran, you have, for example, this Survival Hunter dying very early on, this Arcane Mage dying very early on, so they get discarded. The results want to be put into the results. So after we have all of that, we compile the results and we see how specs have done. So off with the spoilers. These were the results that we have been able to compile so far. Now, a disclaimer before some players get excited about Beast Mastery. Beast Mastery was bugged. This result is because of a bug, not because they are OP. I mean, yes, they are OP, but because Laceration was bugged. Laceration is a very simple single talent that they take, and it will actually be doing way more damage than it should. It has been hotfixed since then, I believe, but the results were contaminated by many of these BM hunters having far higher damage than they should because of this bug. So unfortunately, BM hunter results are to be ignored mostly. We have, unfortunately, also to ignore the results of Frost, Survival, and Outlaw because they were basically not present in almost any log. You had a handful, like one log of Frost DK, but that's not enough to be indicative of anything, right? That's the only log that was present of Frost. Same goes for Survival. They didn't even have one. Outlaw, same thing. So they are to be excluded as well. Now, there are in here a few things we already knew about. For example, we see the practically worst performer out of all, which was Balanced Druid. So practically in every log, I think there was only one where Balance was doing somewhat okay, which I think was this one, and this is considered being almost okay because they are somewhat on track with the rest, but most of the other logs, Balanced Druid was doing very poorly. And they were trying out different styles. This one was the Balanced Druid playing with Dreamburst, so it was playing with the Keeper of the Grove hero talent, and then you had the other balanced druid. This one was the one playing with the Fury of Elune, Arcane styled type of hero talent tree, not doing very well either, regardless of the build they were going for. And surprisingly, they weren't really changed that much from the balancing. Balanced druid was practically not even mentioned in the balancing. They had a few changes in the actual hero talents, but not actually related to them anyways. So their poor performance has continued, even in this last round of tuning. What was also interesting was to see the overlap between Unholy and Havoc, because Unholy was nerfed by slightly more than 10%, and Havoc was buffed by slightly more than 10%. So there was a 20% change between the two. Now, it is worth pointing out, as we mentioned when we saw the changes to Felskard, the buffs to Felskard on top of the buffs to Havoc Demon Hunter, that Felskard was still far behind in terms of single target damage compared to Aldrachi Reaver. So even if you see Havoc's good results in here, they are still all with Reaver's Glaive. They are still all with Aldrachi Reaver. Pretty much none of them is playing with Felskard. Even if the performance is increasing, it's mostly just increasing as Aldrachi Reaver as long as single target is concerned. But the results have definitely improved to the point where now they were actually one of the 6 or 7 best performers in single target. There is also an interesting result, which might be as sad as it is interesting. The result of Augmentation, which is very good, and the results of Devastation, which is literally almost equally as good. And we are saying it's almost as sad because if you ever have these two specs close to each other in the actual damage they do, then you are always going to play with Augmentation Evoker in your raid. There is literally no advantage ever in bringing a Devastation Evoker in your group if it can't even do 10, 15, 20% more damage than an Augmentation Evoker, because the Augmentation Evoker is going to bring other things that are going to be way more useful to the raid than a Devastation Evoker, so them doing equal damage to each other is not a good sign in prospect for the raid, for having both of these specs show up in the raid together. That's kind of the problem right now for both Devastation and Augmentation. Or I guess it's the problem for Devastation. Augmentation doesn't really have many problems in finding a spot in the raid. It's more a problem for Devastation at the moment. Another interesting thing was checking the results after the changes to Mage. So we had some neutral changes to Arcane, but some nerfs continued as usual, nerfs to Spellslinger that Arcane Mage plays, and then we had significant buffs to Fire Mage, and then also significant buffs to Frost Mage. The buffs to Fire Mage were somewhat slowed down by the nerfs given to Living Bomb, because their AoE Living Bomb rework was also being used in single target and doing too much damage in single target. However, for Frost Mage, they were just plain buffs across the board. Also, their Spellslinger talent for Frost only was practically doubled in damage. So it's interesting now to see the results and see that Frost Mage has actually outdamaged Arcane Mage in the results. So Arcane is doing what it's doing as usual, even after the multiple nerfs to Spellslinger. They are still playing Spellslinger and still doing pretty much the same things they were doing before. Except, okay, I guess the Ultra Spam or Arcane Barrage was stopped by the nerfs, but most of the other stuff hasn't really changed. Frost Mage, and that's the main thing, Frost Mage now passing Arcane, that's thanks to Frost Mage's moving over to Spellslinger. Now it's Frost Mages playing with their Splinter damage in the raid and now doing very well. They have moved on to playing Spellslinger. Almost all of them are playing with Spellslinger, and most of these results being positive was also thanks to the damage, the extra damage of Spellslinger compared to what they were playing with before. Frostfire, which wasn't doing nearly as well. So interesting to have now Frost Mage creep up above Arcane Mage in the results. We continue to have, unfortunately, an absolute disaster when it comes to rogues. Even if they got buffed, all 3 of them, by a significant amount, Outlaw was actually the most buffed out of the 3 rogue specs. Apparently, though, nobody cared, because nobody played Outlaw for starters, and then even the ones who did play Assassination and the one who did play Subtlety did quite poorly. overall. In fact, one of the worst results across the board for 2 of the played rogue specs. Another one of the interesting / meaningful changes were the buffs and nerfs to Elemental and Enhancement. Enhancement getting their Stormbringer hero talent nerfed, and Elemental, who would have been fine playing with Stormbringer, got their Stormbringer talent nerfed because of Enhancement, so they moved to Farseer, which was significantly buffed, and the results have been very good now for Elemental. To be fair, the results of Enhancement are good as well. It's not that it's just Elemental doing well, it's just Elemental is doing slightly better, especially after the buffs to your Call of the Ancestors and the damage they are doing. Now Elemental is doing very well. They are all playing, of course, Farseer. Pretty much nobody at this point is playing Stormbringer when it comes to Elemental, and then when it comes to Enhancement, it is practically the reverse. They are all playing with Stormbringer, they are all playing with their Tempest Giga damage buff, but that Tempest has been nerfed. Right, that Tempest for Shaman, for Stormbringer, the damage of your hero talent was nerfed. So the results were that Elemental is doing about 10% better than Enhancement, and even then, Enhancement is the second best, despite Elemental being 10% higher than Enhancement. The last of the curious results has been the gap at the moment between Fury and Arms. The specs were not changed in the latest round of tuning, so we just have Arms doing much better than Fury. It's just how it is. At the moment, the Arms warriors are playing, most of the Arms warriors are playing with the Demolish hero talent tree, as opposed to the Slayer hero talent tree that Fury warriors are going for. I mean, of course, we're still talking about an Arms warrior, so we're not talking about, that many buttons that you have to press in your rotation. But their damage has been quite respectable. It's very stable, of course. Being an Arms warrior, you don't have a lot of burst damage, any powerful burst cooldowns. You have higher damage later on during execute phase, of course, because of your execute damage ramping up later on, but it's a very stable and consistent damage, which is somewhat similar to Fury, except Fury just has lower base damage right now compared to Arms warrior. What we haven't touched on, actually surprisingly even, have been the results of Warlocks. Because across the classes in general, they were the most disappointing together with Rogue. However, Rogue, we already knew they were terrible. They were doing badly, and even after the set of buffs they received, they were still continuing to do bad. Warlock wasn't really buffed by much except for the buff to Destruction Warlock, and the results have been quite poor across the board, across all 3 specs. There was practically not a single log across all 3 Warlock specs combined that managed to go past 750,000 DPS, except for one lone Affliction Warlock in a 4-minute kill, which is a super fast kill, mostly thanks to the 2 completely broken BM Hunters. So the damage was also likely higher for everyone because the pool was so quick. And there was an Affliction Warlock doing some barely 778,000 DPS. And that's the only one that got past the 750,000. And multiple specs in here go above this on average. Not even in their best pool, but just on average they can get past it. And these 3 specs couldn't even get a single log doing that well. So it has been pretty poor across the board for all 3 specs of Warlock right now. At least, for mages you have the fire nerfed, but of course Frost is buff, so now Frost is strong. In DK's cases, even if not many players were playing Frost was still doing well. He just had too few logs to count. And Unholy, even after the nerfs, because they were doing so well before, it's still powerful. The buffs to Havoc made them good. Farewell we haven't talked about after being buffed, but they are doing pretty well at the moment. It is nothing groundbreaking, they're not, absolute top DPS, but their results are doing, are very good right now. Yes, Blizzard did point out they wanted them to start doing more dot damage rather than doing more ferocious bite damage, which was one of the reasons why many of these changes to Feral and to Wildstalker were more about dot damage than ferocious bite. Of course, nobody cares. Feral continues to do 1/3 of its damage with a single button, and their dots are not nearly as powerful, but overall, the results of Feral have been decent to good. At the moment, far better than their counterpart, Balance, when it comes to their results in the beta. Now, these were the results for Mythic Sikran. single target, 100% single target. And that's the reason why we're only checking these results. That is because a couple of reasons. Reason number one, the third boss that was being tested was the Silken Court. Silken Court is like ridiculous. Pulls could not last more than a minute. It's just completely impossible, so there is no point in checking out 1 minute pulls. The other reason is that the boss before for testing was the Loot Piñata Olgrax. Now, the Loot Piñata Olgrax has a pretty deceiving damage profile, a pretty meme damage profile. What you see here in the middle is the large burst damage you do whenever all of the adds are spawning. So practically it's just a single target fight where for 30 seconds you get to turbo AoE your adds. So it's a rather insignificant type of damage profile, just to try to pad AoE damage in the middle of the fight. So it's not nearly as relevant as the pure single target damage testing guilds could have gotten with Sikran, which is what we are checking right now in the results, because it's going to be more relevant to see the performance of the specs. It wouldn't have been nearly as relevant to start picking up the averages of which specs can do the most AoE pad damage in the middle of the Olgrax fight. Right, so we have been only limiting ourselves to checking on Sikran results for today. These were the results of the latest set of balance tuning, and after that coming the latest set of raid testing in the beta. I am going to be leaving behind the link to this spreadsheet just in case you want to check those results yourself, with the link to each and every log where these results happened. We are likely going to send through the healing results by tomorrow, I believe, but for today, at the beginning of this week, on this Monday, it's time to leave each other. So, with these things out of the way, thanks of course as usual for everyone who has watched the video, but also for everyone who is supporting completely for free by liking and commenting down below, as well as subscribing to the channel itself. Now, with these things out of the way, thank you guys again for watching. See you guys tomorrow, and in the meantime, there is a plane passing by. Thank you for the finishing touch, and now it's gone, and now we can leave.